welcome. Yes, my friends, this is the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast, and I'm your host, Rev Recluse, and welcome to the podcast 2121. It is now able, the podcast, to drink in all 50 states of the United States, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, it is another gala. I'm going to say gala this time. Another gala occasion for the podcast. I have lots to talk about for this specific podcast and the performer and the album itself. So I'm going to cut with the usual hello, how are you kind of thing and get right to it. This is a fascinating subject for this particular podcast. The more that I learned about Luis Dimas, who is the subject of this particular podcast and the album that is spotlighted on this, the more that I was intrigued and fascinated by his life and how he ended up in Edmonton, Alberta, of all places, in the mid and late 70s and the early 80s. So, again, this is a very, very interesting podcast, and I say them for all of them, but I mean this one for sure. So, again, I could speak all night about this. I'm going to try to keep it as economically feasible as I possibly can here, to keep it at least under 30 minutes, because again, there's lots to talk about. And go check out the podcast page on Vintage Edmonton for this particular podcast. If you're listening to this podcast or subscribing to the podcast on TuneIn Radio or Google Play or iTunes or anything like that, go check out the podcast page. There will be links to Luis Dimas articles and video of him before and after he was in Edmonton. And again, just a fascinating character. If you read Spanish, or even if you use Google Translate, go check him out on Google. Infamous would be, I guess, the correct term for Mr. Dimas. He's had quite a colorful life. Let's put it that way. So yes, the album itself. This is an album called Today, or translated into Spanish, Hoy. And this was released 1982 at the tail end of Luis Dimas' stay here in Edmonton. He was here roughly, I'm going to say, between 1975 and 1983 before he went back home to Chile. And it's a very interesting album. The original album that I have from him from 1977 is more of a lounge type album. You would listen to it and you would think, okay, this is a person's live act, and it wouldn't be wrong for the most part. That's why they sold these types of albums outside of the nightclubs and places like that, to give you a replication of what he would usually play in a lounge act. This album is a little bit different, and I won't say it's a little bit more out there. It is. It's got a little bit more of a flair, of a panache to it than the first one, The International, which is the subject of another podcast. This one has a little bit more of a flair to it, a little bit more of a I don't know, a gut punch. It's more urgent, I think, than anything else. The photos on the album itself and in the back of Luis himself, he's got a Diego Maradona thing going on with these photos taken at what looks to be on the front porch or the back porch of a house that's not unlike, in my neighborhood of Eastwood, a mature neighborhood. I guess this is, he needed something quick, and he put these out. He got these photos taken, and then just see for himself. He's got a bit of a eyeliner, dyed hair kind of a thing. It's really interesting to see. Like I said, the Diego Maradona thing, that's what I'm going to say. I love this album. I love it even more since I've read the history of Luis Dimas. Again, lots to go through, so I'm going to try to cut to the chase here. Luis Dimas in Chile, his group, Los Twisters, was the first group in Chile to really introduce the twist, and he became a huge star. Even before Chubby Checker did, he became a huge star because of the twist, and it was quite the the famous singer in the 60s, had his own TV show. He moved to Peru and worked in Argentina for a while also. He was a fairly big deal. I mean, I think it was on the first album. He said the Tom Jones of Chile. It wouldn't be too far off there. He was a little bit more of a showman, I think. An old school showman than Tom Jones would. But he had the same kind of an all-purpose kind of vibe to him. And again, just a fascinating guy. So without further ado, I'm going to get to the album itself. We're going to start off with the very first song on this album by Luis Dimas. There's a song called It's Time for Me. Oh, and the album is broken into two parts. Side A in English and side 2 in Latin, although it has a song sung in Italian. I didn't put this one on here, but it's a very, very well done. So this is side A, the English side, with the very first song on Luis Dimas' album called Today, or Hoy, if you will. This is the song called It's Time for Me by Luis Dimas here in the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Luis Dimas with a song called It's Time for Me off the album called Hoy, or Today, if you will, made in 1982. Again, just I cannot say enough about Luis and the album itself. Produced by Luis Dimas, by the way. Recorded at Sundown Recorders in Edmonton, Alberta. Recorded by Jerry Deere and mixed by Jerry Deere in 1982. A lot of the heavy hitters that you would expect in the Edmonton music scene in the late 70s, early 80s, and session-wise with all the different recording studios around are on this album or have mentions on the album. Wes Dacus, is one of the ones, and Jerry Deere, of course, and Vicky Moss. A lot of people like that. So he was very, very well known in the town itself. Had quite a career here in Edmonton. He didn't go without work, I think, for the most part. Was known as an international recording star. The song I'm going to play for you now, again, is his magnum opus, I think, for this album, and I think for his stage show and his nightclub act. It's a song called Mr. Bojangles. It is a classic song, recorded by many, many, many people in the 70s, certainly, and in the 80s. Steve Goodman, Jerry Jeff Walker, I think even Sammy Davis Jr. did it. A lot of people did it. One of those songs that everybody seemed to be doing on nightclub acts. And Luis gives it his own personal flair. Now I'm going to direct you again to the podcast page, which I put an article that was written in the Edmonton Journal just about this time, 1981, 1982, about Luis, about his nightclub act. And it's a fascinating, fascinating story of Luis in this little snapshot playing this nightclub act in Edmonton, again, about 1981, 1982, but about Edmonton nightclub scene in 1981, 1982, right in this general area. There's a great picture of Luis in the middle of the act dressed as Mr. Bojangles. You can't get more hardcore than that, show business wise or nightclub wise. So this is a magnum opus, I feel, about this album. So without further ado, this is Luis Dimas with a song called Mr. Bojangles here in the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast.
Dance. I knew that man Bojangles, and he danced for you in worn-out shoes, silver hair, ragged shirt, baggy pants, the old soft shoe. He jumped so high, he jumped so high. Then he lightly touched down. I met him in a cell in New Orleans. I was down and out. He looked to me to be the eyes of age as the spark ran out. Then he talked of life. That old man talked of life. After click his heels and a start, he said his name Bojangles, and he danced a leg across the cell. He grabbed his hand, he stand his spell before he jumped so high. Then again he clicked his heels. Then he let go left, he let go left, throwing that cane far away. Mr. Bojangles, I said Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, dance. He danced for those administrative shows and county fairs. Throughout the South, he spoke in tears of 15 years, how his dog and he traveled about. The dog up and died, on the road he died. After 20 years, he still grieved. He said he danced now at every chance in honky-tonks for drinks and tips, but most of the time he spent behind this county bars. His heart drinks a bit, then he shook his head. Bojangles was dreaming. Then I asked him, please, please, Mr. Bojangles. I said, Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, dance. And I was dreaming all my life to be as big as that. Oh yeah, so come on, man. Once again, it's not late. Come on, dance, dance, dance. Bojangles, dance, dance, dance. Bojangles, dance. Dream and dance, never too late. Come on and dance. Bojangles, dance, dance, dance. Bojangles, dance, dance and dream. Bojangles, dance, dance, dance. Bojangles, dance.
Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Luis Dimas with the magnum opus off of his album called Today, or Hoy, if you will. A song called Mr. Bojangles. There's so much to talk about Luis Dimas, and his life is, again, so colorful. I'm going to try to hit a few of the bullet points here before we move on to the next song. Again, he was the Chilean Chubby Checker. He introduced, or his band introduced, the twist to Chile in 1962, did a huge hit with a cover of the Twist, and Let's Twist Again, like we did last summer also. Stayed with the group until 1967, decided he was going to go solo, moved to Peru, of all places, and became a huge star in Peru with a number of TV shows until 1973. Apparently a huge earthquake in Peru happened, lost all of his property in Peru. I don't know why he decided he wasn't going to go back to Chile because a coup had just happened. Salvador Allende had been overthrown, and it was in flux in Chile at that time. Decided that he was going to come to Canada and go on with his career, and ended up in Edmonton, of all places, which, like I said, again, it's just incredible that he actually ended up here. Played in Vegas, played in a few places in the States, but he pretty much settled in Canada and in Edmonton. And from about 73, 83, right around that time, 73, 84, he was a Canadian resident and an Edmonton resident. Just a fascinating guy. So we're going to go for the second side here, the Latin side. This is the song called My World Gets Smaller, which is also Spanish and in English. He does both here on this particular song. And again, this is a nice, full-fledged, I'm going to give you everything I got kind of performance from Luis Dimas. So without further ado, here is Luis Dimas off of his album called Hoy, or Today, if you will. A song called, in English and in Spanish, My World Gets Smaller, here on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast.
Round and round, going in circles, wishing to be free. Since you went away, this world is closing in on me. I know I face tomorrow, knowing you'll be there. I see your smile in everything we used to share. The memory of you is everywhere. And my world, it's getting smaller every day. I run, but I can't run away. I see you everywhere I go. And I find you're in my life and in my mind. There's no place left on earth to stay. My world gets smaller every day. In the lonely of the morning, when I'm waking up, I see you standing at the bottom of my coffee cup. I see you in the highway when I'm driving in the car. Downtown in the city, I walk and there you are. I run, but I can't never get too far. 'Cause my world keeps getting smaller every day. I run, but I can't run away. I see you everywhere I go. And I find you're in my life and in my mind. There's no place left on earth to stay. My world gets smaller every day. En la playa, en el campo, la ciudad, veo tu rostro angelical. Yo no te puedo olvidar. And my world keeps getting smaller every day. I run, but I can't run away. My world gets smaller every day.
Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Luis Dimas off of his album called Hoy, or Today, if you will, with a song called My World Gets Smaller in Spanish and in English. There's just so much to go with Luis Dimas. His life at very, very colorful, to say the least. One of the cool things that I found out about Luis Dimas just in the last couple of days is that he was actually in a number of films, when he came back to Chile in approximately, I think it was the late 80s, if I'm not mistaken, mid-late 80s. This film was released in 1993. Not even going to try to tell you what the title of it is, because I'm going to screw it up. I will put it on the podcast post page so you can check it out for yourself if you happen to see it anywhere. But the gist of it was a low-buy sci-fi film from 1993. He plays himself, apparently, and the kicker to that is that he gets abducted by aliens or extraterrestrials at the end of the film. So I'm looking to find this film. It sounds incredible. So yeah, just so much to talk about this gentleman. The last song that I want to play for you on the podcast also happens to be the last song on the album. It's a song called Recordando Penas Juvenales. otherwise called Remembering Juvenile Penalties in English. This was a big hit, or the song Juvenile Penalties was a big hit for Luis and his band called Los Twisters. He's remembering the song. It's pretty much the same thing as the original, although he kind of changes it a little bit, I think. For copyright purposes, I think. But yeah, it's pretty much the same song. Very peppy, very rockin', very upbeat. And, without further ado, Luis Dimas, off of his album called Hoy, or Today, if you will. A song called Recordando Penas Juvenales, or Remembering Juvenile Penalties, here on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast.
Al nacer un verano, una tarde yo la vi. Al verla majestuosa, de ella me enamoré. De amor, baby. Que viva. Pena juvenil de amor. No importó que me dijeran imposible es tu querer. Tú eres solo un muchachito, ella es toda una mujer. Qué feliz entonces me sentía, porque tontamente presumía que a mí solamente ella quería y que el amor ella me dijo, la aventura está acabada. Nunca, nunca olvidaré la burla de su mirada. ¡Mire! Las juveniles son. No, no. Y hoy he recordado aquellas penas de amor. Penas juveniles son las que aquejaron mi corazón. Penas juveniles son las que aquejaron mi corazón. Penas juveniles son las que aquejaron mi corazón. ¡Te voy a cantar! Penas juveniles, penas juveniles. Recuerdo las penas juveniles. Jorge, ¿dónde estás? Mírame, escúchame. Este soy hoy. Penas juveniles son las que aquejaron mi corazón. Penas juveniles son las que aquejaron mi corazón.
Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Luis Dimas off of his album called Hoy, or Today, if you will, with a song called Recordando Penas Juvenales. I'm very proud that I actually did that fairly well. Recalling juvenile penalties. That's the English translation of it. Again, very, very peppy song. I am pleased as punch that I spotlighted this particular record on the podcast. I'm even more pleased as punch that I found out so much more about Luis Dimas. And again, even if you use Google Translate, go on Google and Google Luis Dimas, and you'll get more of an overview and a little bit more of an in-depth look of his life than I could have possibly done here on the podcast. He has a very, very interesting life. I've actually contacted him or contacted his representatives in Chile. Have not heard back from him yet. He is still alive. And as soon as I hear anything, I will put it directly on the podcast post page and let all you fine people know about it. And again, just so much fun to do this particular podcast. that's it, folks. That's the end of the podcast. And again, I would be remiss if I did not say, yes, I am on iTunes. You can subscribe to me on iTunes. Yes, I am on TuneIn. You can subscribe to me on the TuneIn app. Yes, I am on Google Play Music. You can subscribe to me there. Yes, I am on Podomatic. You can definitely subscribe to me there. I think that's about it. I have so much more really cool stuff that's going to be coming on the podcast this summer for stuff that I found just recently. A lot of old 45s of Edmonton bands and Edmonton artists, lots more LPs and stuff like that. So I hope you enjoy the podcast coming up in the next few months anyway. So yeah, I think that's about it. And so until next time, I'll see y'all later.